誰か御社のスタッフからここでいい暮らしができるって聞いたんだけどさ、寝食はただ遊びも充実してるって。関係者以外立ち入り禁止？なこと言うなよ。少しは私の顔を立ててくれよ。
Nian is a limited 6-star defender that focuses on having high defense as well as increasing the defense of all allies around her with her skill 3. So looking at her stats, she has an extremely high amount of hit points, which is partly thanks to her high trust amount, as well as defense. And what is really interesting is that when you compare Nian to other defenders, even of the same level, she has nearly 1,000 hit points more than them. So looking at Saria, as well as Cuora even, has significantly less hit points than Nian. It must be those rock hard abs or something. So looking into her talents, her first talent is Tectonic Armor. When this unit is in the squad, all defenders get an extra 16% max HP. This is only 8% at Elite 1. It is worth noting though that when a talent says in the squad, you don't actually need to place Nian down in order to gain benefit from this buff. Her second talent, Clairvoyance, when deployed, this unit gains 3 shields. Each shield blocks 1 instance of damage. So this is very important to note here for her skill 2, is that it does not matter what damage type those instances of damage is. So it is much more effective against enemies with very slow attack speed. Otherwise they'll just eat through the shields and then they won't really do anything. So it is worth noting that Nian also costs a above average amount of deployment cost, like Cuora only costs around 18, and so in those really tight situations like contingency contract, that is really worth noting when you really need your deployment costs. So looking into her skills, her skill 1 is a simple skill that increases her defense as well as her attack, but it also makes it so her normal attacks deal arts damage. This is really effective at least making her deal some damage to the higher defense enemies in the game. Whereas some of the enemies have really low resistances, especially early in the game, so this allows her to deal full damage to them, and even some resistance enemies she at least deals some damage rather than nothing. So I really like this skill. With Nian's second skill, once activated, she stops attacking and gains a massive boost to her defense and gets an extra +1 block. Upon receiving an attack, it deals arts damage to the attacker equal to a percentage of Nian's attack and silence them for a number of seconds, which is very useful for the exploding slugs as well as defense crushers if you have the Copper Seal skill to Mastery 1. And lastly, Nian's third skill, Iron Defense, gives her an attack buff, as well as increases the defense of all nearby operators within a large AoE, and gives them +1 block, and status resistance of reducing the duration of stun, cold, and freeze by 50%. I find this skill to be really interesting because it doesn't increase the defense of Nian herself, and increases her attack, though it is worth noting that she still deals physical damage with this skill. So unlike her skill 1, It's still not going to be realistically enough to deal a huge amount of damage to enemies, but the increase in defense as well as +1 block is extremely effective for AoE guards, allowing them to attack an extra target, as well as your less defense defenders in your front line, or if you use guards in your front line. And finally, Nian, for the base buffs, has 2 buffs that are associated with the workshop. So her first base buff is Rare Metal Identification. Increases the byproduct rate by 100% when processing elite materials. And her second base buff makes it so that every time that she produces an elite material, it will make it so that she uses up 2 more morale compared to normal. And while this sounds really good on paper, it really isn't as good as it sounds. And most operators that have either 75 or 80%, to me, is close enough to not really get nearly as much benefit as it sounds with this base buff. So this is my summary of Nian. So overall, her stats are very high for a tank defender, having high enough attack to at least deal some damage to the weaker enemies, as well as having high enough defense, especially with her second and first skills, to tank a large majority of the enemies in the game. And for skill mastery recommendations, I wouldn't recommend getting any mastery levels on her skill 1. I don't think that it provides enough benefit to justify the material costs. Her skill 2, mastery 1, is very effective because it allows you to be completely immune to defense crushers. Because at skill 7, the silence duration is only 3 seconds, whereas on mastery 1 it becomes 4 seconds, and the defense crusher attacks roughly every 4 seconds. So that makes it so that Nian cannot be stunned by them. And her skill 3, I do recommend getting mastery 3. It is very effective at using Ak, which is one of the main reasons I have seen Nian's skill 3 be used. So for a limited operator, I think Nian is definitely worth at least putting some orundum down to try to get her. And when I say limited, it means that Nian is only on special banners. You cannot get her on any standard banners as well as new character banners unless it specifically says that Nian is part of the banner itself. So I definitely think that she's worth getting if you have enough orundum, but at the same time, she's kind of just a 6-star Cuora the majority of the time, where she deals extra damage as well as having more hit points than Cuora, and her skill 3 is very interesting, but for me personally, I pretty much never use it. Unless you have a lot of AoE guards, that can benefit from that, or you have really squishy other defenders and you don't need to worry about Nian survivability, I pretty much never use that skill. And out of all 3 skills, I pretty much use her skill 1 the most, just because of the consistent uptime as well as the ability to deal arts damage. And her base buffs, while it sounds good on paper, it really isn't as effective as it sounds. And it is worth noting here that I forgot to mention that both of these skills come together, and you do not need to promote Nian in order to get any benefit from it. So if you do get Nian, I do recommend getting her to Elite 2, level 50 or higher. I think that for a defender, getting as much survivability as you can is definitely worth it. So with that, hopefully this information and showcase gives you an idea of whether or not you want to get Nian, either in the upcoming rerun of her banner, or if she comes in a future limited banner. So with that, thank you very much for watching, and have a wonderful day.